This presentation explores men's fashion in the 1970s. The peacock revolution that began in the 60s will move from the fashion-forward mods and Carnaby Street crowd to the mainstream crowd to affect all men's wardrobes in some way. Men began to buy much more clothing at a faster rate, instead of buying a few classic items and wearing them for years. The upsurge in retail sales then inspired more designers to invest in creating trendy styles for men, which in turn fed a period of rapid change and creativity that is unusual in menswear. By 1980, even Christian Dior had created a line for men called at that time Dior Monsieur. New styles created such excitement that it is harder to find advertisements for traditional tailored suits during the 70s. They were made and they were widely worn, but they were not fashion news. Traditional tailored suits did respond to fashions with slight alterations. Suit lapels grew very wide, taking up most of the upper chest. The jacket waist nips in once again. Trousers are made with moderate flares. Three-piece suits return, although the two-piece suit is standard. Conservative men who wished to look a little more up-to-date adopted the waistcoat again as a small gesture to new times. All of these changes were in response to the nostalgia trend for 1930s styles. Traditional suit trousers are flat front with a slant pocket and no cuffs. Very traditional men did not adopt the flare trousers of the 1970s, while many men did. The size of traditional suit patterns such as Glen plaid, seen on the left, pinstripes in the center, and an Ivy League plaid sport coat will grow larger under the influence of 1960s pop art. On the left, we can see a single-breasted jacket that features a notch lapel, as the rules of tailoring dictate. As you can see in the center, this pinstripe suit is single-breasted, but features a peak lapel, which tailoring rules say belong on double-breasted suits. The peak lapel is larger than the collar above it, and it points outward toward the shoulders. American makers break these rules on occasion to create a new or fresh style, and nothing spurred designers onto bending or breaking rules more than the zeitgeist of the 1970s. Double-breasted suits are an option for men who wish to look more distinctive or sporty. Sport coats and blazers remain popular, replacing full suits for more and more occasions. On the right, we see a blue blazer, and just behind that, a sport coat. Pierre Cardin makes a name for himself as a couture menswear designer. We can see that his styling is much more extreme, such as extremely wide lapels. The trouser is cut with a very short rise, creating a distinctive 1970s short zipper look. These fashions, like any couture, were worn by a relatively small but influential group of international celebrities, socially prominent wealthy people, movie stars, and the creative classes. The average American man found their fashion ideas from television, not the society columns. No male performer in this era had as much impact on American mainstream style trends as Johnny Carson, the host of the late-night talk show The Tonight Show. When he wore turtleneck sweaters on his show, men throughout the U.S. bought turtlenecks. Retailers in small towns as well as big cities watched his show and heard customers ask the next day for the same type of clothing they had seen. Johnny Carson was making some menswear producers very rich, and so Carson was approached by a menswear manufacturer to sell his own clothing rather than someone else's. The rest, as they say, is show business and fashion business history, the first time a male celebrity launched a fashion line. Johnny Carson Apparel Incorporated was one of the fastest growing concerns in the history of the menswear business, and its suits were among the best-selling men's fashions ever. His objective was to create smart styles that were fairly simple for the average man. Carson marketed a subtle version of the bright 1970s colors, and he used a polyester and wool blend for affordability and wearability. Many of his jackets featured two side vents in the back of the jacket to lend an air of the European continental cut. Let's look at suit vents more closely. I've referred to them several times, but now is a good time to define the terminology, as these will become prominent features from the 1960s through now. The vents are slits in the back hem of the jacket. The double jacket vent, or side vents, that I referred to in Johnny Carson's suits, features twin openings that sit on each side of the jacket's back hem. Suits with double jacket vents are commonly associated with the British tailoring lineage, giving the wearer a more sophisticated or European flair in their style. Double vented jackets naturally require more time and more cost to produce, and so they tended to be found more frequently on made-to-measure or bespoke suits, as well as occasionally on premium ready-to-wear suit brands. Since gaining popularity in Ivy League sport coats in the 1950s, the single jacket vent is often considered the American style. It is cheaper to manufacture and so is far more available as the standard. And finally, we have the rule breaker style, the ventless jacket. During the 20th century, this style comes and goes. It is most appropriate for formal wear currently, but we will see it used in regular suits as part of high fashion wear, particularly in the 1980s. We developed a signature 1970s suit called the leisure suit. We saw in the 1940s and 50s casual jackets, such as the loafer coat, developed for comfort and casual wear. The leisure suit is where comfort meets mod styling for the average man. Suits will be made in bright colors. Some will feature color blocking or even some pop art features. The jackets are not made with traditional menswear construction techniques, but are made using techniques to make women's clothing. So the jackets are softer. The jacket can be shorter, falling just below the waist, or fall to just below the derriere. The suit jacket avoids the traditional lapel and collar of tailored suits, as they are trickier to make. Instead, leisure suits use modified lapels or shirt-style collars. At first a novelty, offering men a colorful, casual alternative, the leisure suit became the subject of derision as the decade wore on. So many were made cheaply from inferior polyesters and in overly bright colors that desirable fashion moved on. As with so many trends, it had to be done very well to be effective. Trouser styling in the 1970s introduced some new elements. The traditional tailored trouser seen at left remains a flat front with a slant pocket. One new trouser style features a tab belt seen in the center. This acts as a self-finishing belt. This trouser also features a hallmark of casual 70s trousers, the horizontal front pocket. On the right, we see jeans styling creeping into casual trousers with the front slant pocket and contrast stitching. The signature pocket styles for casual trousers are patch pockets in the front, as seen on the left and center. This has the effect of reversing the trousers. Patch pockets on the back had long been the hallmark of jeans, as we can see on the right. Casual and trendy trousers are worn with wide belts, and in the center we can see another element from the 70s, the large decorative belt buckle. Men wore their trousers tighter in the 70s, and the addition of flashy belts and buckles featured a man's figure below the waist. Two new fabric styles join the fashion scene: corduroy, the soft, tufted cotton that creates rows, and velveteen, a soft, tufted fabric that does not have visible rows. both of these fabrics have been associated with feminine clothing in the past. You can see a sample of corduroy at the left. Both fabrics are plush to the touch. The idea of introducing soft fabric to men's tailoring is novel and another way to bring more casual styling to traditional tailoring, as well as introduce the idea that suits could be made of trendy fabrics. Corduroy jeans became a staple of the 70s for both men and women. Fashion-forward men embraced the opportunity for self-expression, growing their hair much longer and returning to fabrics men had not worn since the 18th century, velvet and satin. This continues the Romantic revival started in the 1960s. We can see these styles feature a body-hugging fit, allowing men to express sensuality in their clothing. The business shirt, worn with a tailored suit, remains largely untouched. They are overwhelmingly dominant as formal, business, and business casual attire, and are almost always expected or even required where dress codes were enforced. Traditionally, business shirts could only be in solid colors or light stripes. Light blue, pink, or yellow were seen as appropriate for business attire in the U.S. During the 1970s, brighter colors and patterns were introduced, but the vast majority of these would be worn for business casual or with sport coats. One would not visit your banker or lawyer wearing them. We have two new takes on the business shirt. On the right, we can see a short sleeve option offered for comfort. It was not considered fully proper in an office, and many men wore them under the suit coat to make the whole outfit cooler to wear. Another new twist is offering shirts in knit fabrics for a tighter fit and stretch comfort. Again, it was not as correct as a starched cotton shirt. If you like crazy patterns, then shirts and ties of the 70s are for you. Nature motifs, stripes, large paisley, and animal prints made of wool and polyester materials gave the ties new texture and focus. Any traditional pattern you can think of was exploded for impact. Ties expanded to about 4.5 inches wide, worn long and just touching the top of the trousers. The inspiration was taken from 1940s American ties. Men's formal wear continued in traditional black for upscale and society events. Renting is now common and affordable and marketed to the young middle classes who attend high school proms, college dances, and festive weddings, no matter what time of day the occasion was. For many people, correct rules go out the window. Fun colors and combinations are created to appeal to this youth market, and renting a tuxedo became a rite of passage. Hallmarks of 1970s formal wear include very wide lapels with satin or velvet ribbon edging. In the image to the far right, we can see satin or velvet cloth sewn onto the lapel itself in a contrast color. The tuxedo jacket can be worn with a matching trouser or a black trouser that matched the trim on the coat. Shirts are plain front or ruffled with contrast stitching on the edges of the ruffles. And we can see a signature of the 1970s, the bow tie so large we call it a butterfly bow tie. During the 1970s, men's fashion embraced many aspects that had previously been defined by society as so-called feminine. This caused some anxiety in society and certainly for individual men. Fathers and sons argued vehemently over whether men wore such things or styled their hair such a way. To ease some of this fear, manufacturers began advertising to men in overtly sexual ways that would never have been tolerated in American society before this. Classic Oxfords remain the correct business shoe for men, but slip-on shoes are the most fashionable in the 1970s. They were available in classic styles for business or with mod buckles or color blocking for casual wear. The most fashion-forward men wore platform shoes. Traditional men's haircuts remained from the 1950s with side parts, but the hair has grown a little longer to just cover the tops of the ears. The general rule for conservative society was as long as the hair did not touch the shirt collar and back, it was acceptable. One of the signature styles of the 70s is men's facial hair. The standard was growing moderately long sideburns that could reach from the bottom of the ear to the bottom of the jawline. Some men revived the expressive facial hair of the Victorian era with fanciful sideburns. Many men grew a mustache that was trimmed straight, aligning with the bottom lip. Black men styled their hair naturally, with conservative men choosing short lengths. On the right, we can see a combination of sideburns and a style of beard called a Van Dyke beard after the Dutch painter. The mustache and beard joined to frame the mouth. Progressive men grew their hair long past the shirt collar. This style, on the left, is very typical of the 70s with a center part and razor-cut feathered layers with short sections on top. Counterculture men grew their hair or facial hair without a formal style, inspired by hippie hair, as seen on the right. Men's hats are no longer mandatory, worn for personal expression only. Newsboy caps come in several styles, using interesting fabrics and colors. The trendiest styles are large and puffy, using bright colors and color blocking. Another trendy hat was a wide brim hat with a flat crown and decorative wide hatband. The digital watch is introduced in 1972 as the latest and most luxurious item. It cost $2,100 then, which is the equivalent of $13,000 today. But by the end of the decade, we'd figured out how to mass market them, and the price dropped to $10, or about $60 today. Let's look at some everyday young men in San Diego in the 1970s. They wear long hair, some in more defined styles and some unstyled. All wear their hair parted in the center, following the more progressive trend. There is an assortment of jeans and t-shirts in bright colors and denim garments. Two men in the center, looking directly at us, wear a color-blocked sweater with horizontal stripes and a short windbreaker. The man at left wears a bright pink shirt. This is a shirt jack from the 1950s or 60s, possibly purchased at a thrift store. Let's compare that photo to some real people at the office. The man on the right wears a three-piece suit, which has returned under the nostalgia trend. The man at the back center wears a tailored suit, but featuring patch pockets, so it is very 1970s. His tie is wide, featuring large dots. The seated man to the left wears a traditional pinstripe suit. We can see his hair is parted at the side and worn long enough to cover the top of his ears. It just touches the shirt collar and back, and he wears the 1970s signature mustache cut straight with the lip line. All the men in suits wear white or at most possibly light yellow shirts. The contrast in these two groups of people sums up the wide differences that faced society in the 1970s. It's hard to believe such a generation gap or political mindset gap coexisted at the same time. We have two very influential subcultures forming in society that develop signature ways of dressing. The first is the growth of a publicly gay culture that reflected very signature styles. Following the Stonewall riot in 1969, the 70s brought a remarkable period of transformation for gays and lesbians, particularly those living in America's coastal cities. At its core, that transformation was about visibility. The 70s saw the first gay television movie, That Certain Summer, a sexy on-screen kiss between two men in Sunday, Bloody Sunday, and the release of Cabaret, which had been hailed as the first movie that not only showed but actually celebrated historical gay culture. There were political gains too. Edward Koch, then serving in Congress, became one of the first elected officials to publicly lobby on behalf of gay residents of Greenwich Village. Consequently, Gay Pride Week was established. And perhaps most significantly, in December 1973, the board of the American Psychiatric Association voted 13-0 to remove same-sex attractions from its list of psychiatric disorders. Large cities sprouted gay-friendly businesses and even sometimes entire neighborhoods. Gay and lesbian fashion trends were seen regularly on the street and in magazines or newspapers with gay pride press coverage. This was the first time the average American became aware they probably knew people who were gay and had to begin to come to terms with what they had been taught. In the 1920s, gay culture had been an open secret in the art scene. Now it was marching down Main Street. The second fashion subculture we'll look at today is Blaxploitation or soul fashion. By the 1970s, Black audiences had had enough of seeing how they were portrayed in Hollywood movies, if they were acknowledged at all. A genre of films emerged that were named Blaxploitation films aimed at the urban Black audience. But the genre's appeal broadened. Hollywood noticed and actually financed a few of these films. In 1971, the film Shaft was released, followed in 1972 by the film Superfly. Blaxploitation films were controversial. They worried Black activists who did not want that lifestyle glorified, or they feared it would cement white stereotypes that all Black men were pimps and dealers. The films also shocked white society to see the extent of gang violence and street life. The costumes featured in those films and on stage with soul music performers gelled to create a truly unique style of dressing that has long been overlooked. The styles seen on screen were available in specialty boutiques in Harlem or in other large cities. But as early as 1968, special trendy menswear makers were creating extreme versions of mod and 70s fashions available to anyone through mail-order catalogs like Eleganza, a company based in Massachusetts. This catalog featured the most extreme versions of every trend and heavily featured the Superfly-inspired soul dressing. Each page is like watching an episode of Star Trek, and it serves as endless inspiration. Fortunately for us, there are some pages scanned on the internet. Some of the outrageous styles featured on sites that trumpet "you won't believe what they wore in the 70s" are from this or similar specialty catalogs. In the 1960s and 70s, we saw incredible creativity applied to menswear as men once again joined the fashion parade. They began to buy much more clothing at a faster rate, instead of buying a few classic items and wearing them for years. There was much more experimentation with the definition of masculine attire than in any single period in clothing history.